Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking one of the most fascinating, ancient, and honestly completely accidental histories in human civilization, the story of how cats seamlessly integrated into our lives. If you've ever looked at a cat just napping in a sunbeam and thought, how exactly did they convince us to give them free rent? Well, you are in the right place. So let's dive right in by addressing a huge historical mystery. Why do we keep pets that flat out refuse to work for us? Throughout history, we've always favored useful animals, right? We brought in dogs because they were incredibly eager to help us guard and herd. Yet somehow we also brought these fiercely independent cats right into our homes, and we treat them just like dogs, even though they offer absolutely none of that traditional service. How did that even happen? Let's start with Section 1, the human lifestyle shift. To really understand our feline companions, we first have to look back at a massive plot twist in human history. For literally hundreds of thousands of years, people lived as nomads, wandering hunters and gatherers following herds, foraging, and rarely staying in one place. But then, right around 12,000 years ago, everything flipped. Humans in the Near East started cultivating crops, stuff like wheat and barley. Villages popped up, and for the very first time ever, people started doing something totally revolutionary. They started actually storing their food instead of constantly hunting for it. Which brings us to Section 2, the rodent invasion. Now, agriculture was an absolute game changer for humans, but it unintentionally created a huge crisis. It was a massive domino effect. Step 1, you've got agricultural success, so you're storing all this harvested grain. Step 2, the rich scent of that grain drifts out and acts like a giant dinner bell, attracting countless mice and rats. And then, Step 3, absolute disaster. These rodents invaded, they destroyed the harvests, they contaminated the leftover food, and they legitimately threatened the survival of these new communities. As the saying goes, the more grain humans stored, the more rodents arrived. I really want to emphasize the sheer panic here. These early villages were facing a spreading plague. Their absolute greatest achievement, a stable food supply, was literally being devoured right in front of their eyes, and their survival was completely hanging in the balance. And that leads us to Section 3. Enter the African wildcat. Right out of the darkness, a totally unexpected savior shows up, the African wildcat. Now, to be clear, they were this quiet, highly efficient predator, but they definitely didn't show up to make friends with us. They arrived with their very own agenda, drawn entirely by the absolute feast of mice and rats that were feeding on the humans' grain. Let's look at Section 4, service versus independence. This is where the dynamic gets super interesting. Just look at the direct contrast here. On the one hand, you have wolves and early dogs. They're actively interested in working alongside us, taking commands, earning their keep. But in stark contrast, you have the African wildcats. They were cautious, entirely solitary, and fiercely independent. They absolutely did not want to take orders. So how on earth do creatures like this end up getting adopted and pampered just like dogs when they entirely refuse to act like them? Well, it ultimately comes down to one simple fact. The rodents had to go. Despite the wildcats literally not caring at all about pleasing humans, and despite their intense independence, the cats and the villagers just serendipitously shared this one exact goal. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, an accidental friendship. Because of this shared mission, humans started to notice a pretty amazing pattern. Wherever the cats were hanging out, way fewer rodents survived. But honestly, even more importantly, look at what the cats weren't doing. The villagers realized, hey, these wild animals aren't attacking us, they aren't stealing our crops, and they aren't competing with us for any resources. For the first time, people were watching a wild animal quietly solve their biggest problem while posing zero threat. It all boils down to this perfectly stated quote: neither side had planned this relationship. It was a totally accidental partnership, just a simple, passive exchange. The cats got a reliable, all-you-can-eat buffet of rodents, and the humans got their food protected. They didn't need these cats to fetch or guard the perimeter or act like a dog at all. Just by letting these independent creatures be themselves, the humans got exactly what they needed. And that formed the foundation of a friendship that has lasted for thousands of years. Which leaves us with this totally fascinating historical paradox. When you look at our fiercely independent feline friends, who literally moved into our early villages on their own terms, ate our pests, and convinced us to shelter them without ever taking a single order, we really gotta ask, who actually domesticated who? Next time your cat completely ignores you, just remember they are honoring a 12,000-year-old tradition of pure independence. Thanks so much for watching this explainer, and I hope it makes you look at your pet in a whole new light.